Chapter 16. By the end of the first day's hiring, Call had collected 4 boys, none of them yet 18. Young Bill Spittle, the one they called Swift Bill, was no older than Newt, and his brother Pete only a year older than Bill. So desperate were their family circumstances that Call was almost hesitant to take them. The widow Spittle had a brood of 8 children, Bill and Pete being the oldest. Ned Spittle, the father of them all, had died of drink 2 years before. It looked to Call as if the family was about to starve out. They had a little creek-bottom farm not far north of Pickle's Gap, but the soil was poor, and the family had little to eat but sow-belly and beans. The widow Spittle, however, was eager for him to take the boys, and would hear no protest from Call. She was a thin woman with bitter eyes. Call had heard from someone that she had been raised rich in the East, with servants to comb her hair and help her into her shoes when she got up. It might just have been a story. It was hard for him to imagine a grown-up who would need to be helped into their own shoes. But if even part of it was true, she had come a long way down. Ned Spittle had never got around to putting a floor in the shack of a house he built. His wife was rearing 8 children on the bare dirt. He had heard it said that Ned had never got over the war, which might have explained it. Plenty hadn't. It accounted for the shortage of grown men of a certain age, that war. Call himself felt a kind of guilt at having missed it, though the work he and Gus had done on the border had been just as dangerous and just as necessary. "Take 'em," the widow Spittle said, looking at her boys as if she wondered why she'd borne them. "I reckon they'll work as hard as any." Call knew the boys had helped take a small herd to Arkansas. He paid the widow a month's wage for each boy, knowing she would need it. There was evidently not a shoe in the family. Even the mother was barefoot, a fact that must shame her, if the servant story were true. He didn't take the Spittle boys with him, for he had brought no spare horses. But the boys started at once for Lonesome Dove on foot, each of them carrying a blanket. They had one pistol between them, a Navy Colt with half its hammer knocked off. Though Call assured them he would equip them well once they got to Lonesome Dove, they wouldn't leave the gun. "We're never shot area the gun," Swift Bill said, as if that meant they couldn't. When he took his leave, Miss Spittle and the remaining 6 children scarcely noticed him. They stood in the hot yard with a scrawny hen or two scratching around their bare feet, watching the boys and crying. The mother, who had scarcely touched her sons before they left, stood straight up and cried. 3 of the children were girls, but the other 3 were boys in their early teens, old enough at least to be of use to their mother. "We'll take good care of them," Call said, wasting words. The young girls hung on to the widow's frayed skirts and cried. Call rode on, though with a bad feeling in his throat. It was better that the boys go. There was not enough work for him there, but they were the pride of the family. He would take as good care of them as he could, and yet what did that mean, with a drive of 2,500 miles to make? He made the Raney ranch by sundown, a far more cheerful place than the Spittle homestead. Joe Raney had a twisted leg, the result of an accident with a buckboard, but he got around on the leg almost as fast as a healthy man. Call was not as fond of Maud, Joe's fat, red-faced wife, as Augustus was, but then he had to admit he was not as fond of any woman as Augustus was. Maud Raney was built like a barrel, with a bosom as big as buckets and a voice that some claimed would make hair fall out. It was the general consensus around Lonesome Dove that if she and Augustus had married, their combined voices would have deafened whatever children they might have produced. She talked at the table like some men talked when they were driving mules. Still, she and Joe had managed to produce an even dozen children so far, 8 of them boys, and all of them strapping. Among them, the Raneys probably ate as much food in one meal as the Spittles consumed in a week. As near as Call could determine, they all devoted most of their waking hours to either growing or butchering or catching what they ate. Augustus's blue pigs had been purchased from the Raneys and were the first thing Maud thought to inquire about when Call rode up. "Have you et that shoat yet?" Maud asked, before he could even dismount. "No, we ain't," Call said. "I guess Gus is having him for Christmas, or else he just likes to talk to him." "Well, step down and have a wash at that bucket," Maud said. "I'm cooking one of those Shoat's cousins right this minute." It had to be admitted that Maud Raney set a fine table. Call had no sooner got his sleeves rolled up and his hands clean than supper began. Joe Raney just had time to mumble a prayer before Maud started pushing around the cornbread. Call was faced with more meats than he had seen on one table since he could remember. Beefsteak and pork chops, chicken and venison, and a stew that appeared to contain squirrel, and various less familiar meats. Maud got red in the face when she ate, as did everyone else at her table, from the steam rising off the platters. "This is my varmint stew, Captain," Maud said. "Oh," he asked politely, "what kind of varmints?" "Whatever the dogs catch," Maud said, "or the dogs themselves. If they don't manage to catch nothing, I won't support a lazy dog." "She put a possum in," one of the little girls said. She seemed as full of mischief as her fat mother, who, fat or not, had made plenty of mischief among the men of the area before she settled on Joe. "Now, Maggie, don't be giving away my recipes," Maud said. "Anyway, the captain's likely ate possum before." "At least it ain't a goat," Call said, trying to make conversation. It was an unfamiliar labor, since at his own table he mostly worked at avoiding it. But he knew women liked to talk to their guests, and he tried to fit into the custom. "We've heard a rumor that Jake is back and on the run," Joe Raney said. He wore a full beard, which at the moment was shiny with pork drippings. Joe had a habit of staring straight ahead. Though Call assumed he had a neck joint like other men, he had never seen him use it. If you happened to be directly in front of him, Joe would look you in the eye, but if you were positioned a little to the side, his look went floating on by. "Yes, Jake arrived," Call said. "He's been to Montana and says it's the prettiest country in the world." "It's probably filled with women then," Maud said. "I remember Jake. If he can't find a woman, he gets so restless he'll scratch." Call saw no need to comment on Jake's criminal status, if any. Fortunately, the Raneys were too busy eating to be very curious. The children, who had been well brought up, didn't try for the better meats, but made do with a platter of chicken and some fryback and cornbread. One little tad, evidently the run of the family, got nothing but cornbread and chicken gizzards, but he knew better than to complain. With 11 brothers and sisters, all bigger than him, complaint would have been dangerous. "Well, what's Gus up to?" Maud asked. "I've been sitting here waiting for him to come over and try to take me away from Joe, but I don't guess he's coming." "Has he still got his craving for buttermilk?" "Yes, he drinks it by the gallon," Call said. "I fancy it myself, so we compete." He felt Maud's statement not in the best of taste, but Joe Raney continued to stare straight ahead and drip into his beard. Call finally asked if he could hire a couple of the boys. Maud sighed and looked down her double row of children. "I'd rather sell pigs than hire out boys," she said. "But I guess they've got to see the world sometime." "What's the pay?" Joe asked, always the practical man. "Why, $40 and found, I reckon," Call said. "Of course we'll furnish the mounts." That night he slept in a wagon in the Rainey's yard. He had been offered a place in the loft, but it was piled so high with children that he hardly trusted himself in it. Anyway, he preferred the out-of-doors, though the out-of-doors at the Rainey's was more noisy than he was used to. The pigs grunted all night, looking for lizards or something to eat. Then there was a barn owl that wouldn't stop calling, so he had a time getting to sleep. The next morning he got a promise from Maud that her 2 oldest boys would get themselves to Lonesome Dove by the end of the week. The boys themselves, Jimmy and Ben Raney, scarcely said a word. Call rode off, feeling satisfied, believing he had enough of a crew to start gathering cattle. Word would get out, and a few more men would probably trickle in. They had to get the cattle and get them branded. At least they had the luxury of surplus horses, or did if Gus and Jake hadn't contrived to fiddle around and lose them. He worried about that possibility most of the way home. Not that Gus wasn't competent. So far as sheer ability went, Gus was as competent as any man he'd ever known. There had been plenty of times when he'd wondered if he himself could match Gus, if Gus really tried. It was a question that never got tested because Gus seldom tried. As a team, the two of them were perfectly balanced. He did more than he needed to, while Gus did less. Gus himself often joked about it. "If you got killed, I might work harder," he said. "I might get in a righteous frame of mind if I had that stimulation. But you ain't killed, so what's the point?" Call wasted no time getting back, wishing all the way that he had the mare. She'd spoiled him, made him too aware of the limitation of his other mounts. The fact that she was dangerous made him like her even more. She made him extra watchful, which was good. When he got within 15 miles of Lonesome Dove, he cut west, thinking they would be holding the herd in that direction. He rode around the southern edge of the bad brush country and struck the trail of the horses. They had been going south over their own tracks, which was curious. Gus had taken them back to town. Probably he had a reason, but it was not one Call could guess, so he loped on home. When he approached the town, he saw the horses grazing upriver a little ways, with Dietz and Newts and the Irishman holding them. They looked to all be there, so evidently nothing had happened. One thing about Gus McCrae, he was easily found. By 3 in the afternoon, any afternoon, he would be sitting on the porch, drawing occasionally from his jug. When Call rode up, he was sitting there taking a nap. There was no sign of Jake. "You're a fine guard," he said, dismounting. Augustus had his hat over his eyes, but he removed it and looked at Call. "How's Maud Raney?" he asked. "She's in good health," Call said. "She fed me twice." "Good thing it was just twice," Augustus said. "If you'd stayed a week, you'd have had to rent an ox to get home." "She's anxious to sell you more pigs," Call said, taking the jug and rinsing his mouth with whiskey. "If Joe was to get killed, I might court her again," August speculated. "I hope you will," Call said. "Them 12 young ones ought to have a good father. What are the horses doing back here so soon?" "Why, grazing, most likely," Augustus said. "Didn't Pedro make a try?" "No, he didn't, and for a very good reason," Augustus said. "What reason would that be?" "Because he died," Augustus said. "Well, I swear," Call said, stunned. "Is that the truth?" "I ain't seen the corpse," Augustus said, "but I imagine it's true. Jasper Fant rode in looking for work and had the news, though the scamp didn't give it to me until I had wasted most of the night." "I wonder what killed him," Call said. Pedro Flores had been a factor in their lives, off and on for 30 years, though probably they had not actually seen him more than 6 or 7 times. It was surprising hearing he was gone, and though it should have been a relief, it wasn't exactly. It was too much of a surprise. Jasper wasn't up on the details," Augustus said. "He just heard it from a vaquero, but I allow it's true because it explains why you could elope in with a boy and an idiot and saunter off with his remuda." "Well, I swear," Call said again, "I never expected that." "Oh, well," Augustus said, "I never either, but then I don't know why not. Mexicans don't have no special dispensation. They die like the rest of us. I expect Bull will die one of these days, and then we won't have nobody to whack the dinner bell with the crowbar." "Pedro was tough, though," Call said. After all, the man had more or less nearly a 100-mile stretch of the border, and for nearly 30 years. Call had known many men who died, but somehow had not expected it of Pedro, though he himself had fired several bullets at him. "I'd like to know what took him," Call said. "He might have choked on a pepper," Augustus said. "Them that can't be killed by knives or bullets usually break their necks falling off the porch or something. Remember Johnny Norvell dying of that bee sting? I guess Johnny had been shot 20 times, but a darn bee killed him." It was true. The man had rangered with them, and yet the bee sting had given him a seizure of some kind, and no one could bring him out of it. "Well, it will about finish the Flores operation," Augustus said. "He just had 3 boys, and we hung the only one of them with any get up and go." To Augustus's surprise, Call sat down on the porch and took a big swallow from the jug. He felt curious, not sick, but suddenly empty. It was the way a kick in the stomach could make you feel. It was an odd thing, but true, that the death of an enemy could affect you almost as much as the death of a friend. He had experienced it before when news reached them that Kicking Wolf was dead. Some young soldier on his second patrol had made a lucky shot and killed him on the Clear Fork of the Brazos, and Kicking Wolf had kept 2 companies of rangers busy for 20 years. Killed by a private. Call had been shoeing a horse when P brought him that piece of news, and he felt so empty for a spell that he had to put off finishing the job. That had been 10 years ago, and he and Gus soon quit rangering. So far as Call was concerned, the death of Kicking Wolf meant the end of the Comanches, and thus the end of their real job. There were other chiefs, true, and the final fights were yet to be fought, but he had never had the vengeful nature of some rangers, and had no interest in spending a decade mopping up renegades and stragglers. Pedro Flores was a far cry from being the fighter Kicking Wolf had been. Pedro seldom rode without 20 or 30 vaqueros to back him up, whereas Kicking Wolf, a small man no bigger than the boy, would raid San Antonio with 5 or 6 braves and manage to carry off 3 women, scare all the whites out of 7 or 8 counties just by traveling through them. But Pedro was of the same time, and it occupied them just as long. "I didn't know you liked that old bandit so much," Augustus said. "I didn't like him," Call said. "I just didn't expect him to die." "He probably never expected it either," Augustus said. "He was a rough old cob." After a few minutes, the empty feeling passed, but Call didn't get to his feet. The sense that he needed to hurry, which had been with him most of his life, had disappeared for a space. "We might as well go on to Montana," he said. "The fun's over around here." Augustus snorted, amused by the way his friend's mind worked. "Call, there never was no fun around here," he said. "And besides, you never had no fun in your life. You wasn't made for fun. That's my department." "I used the wrong word, I guess," Call said. "Yes, but why did you?" Augustus said. "That's the interesting part." Call didn't feel like getting drawn into an argument, so he kept quiet. "First you run out of Indians. Now you've run out of bandits. That's the point," Augustus said. "You got to have somebody to outwit, don't you?" "I don't know why I'd need anybody when I've got you," Call said. "I don't see why we just don't take over northern Mexico now that Pedro's dead," Augustus said. It's just down the darn street. I'm sure there's still a few folks down there who'd give you a fight." "I don't need a fight," Call said. "It won't hurt us to make some money." "It might," Augustus said. "I might drown in the Republican River, like the Pumphrey boy. Then you'd get all the money. You wouldn't even know how to have fun with it. You'd probably use it to buy gravestones for old bandits you happen to like." "If you drown in the Republican River, I'll give your part to Jake," Call said. "I guess he'd know how to spend it." With that, he mounted and rode off, meaning to find Jasper Fant and hire him, if he really wanted to work.